The Peterson family lived in an old colonial house in the heart of a quiet countryside. Surrounded by sprawling fields and whispering woods, their home was the kind that held secrets. For decades, the family had passed down tales of strange happenings, whispers in the walls, shadows where there should be none, and a persistent chill that lingered, even in the summer. But these stories were always dismissed as mere family folklore. Emily Peterson, a curious and strong-willed 17-year-old, loved the house. She didn't believe in ghost stories or family curses. To her, the creaky old home was just that, an old house with creaks and groans caused by the wind or shifting wood. Her parents, however, treated certain parts of the house with reverence, especially the attic. Emily had often wondered why the attic was off-limits. She'd only been up there a few times as a child, and even then she was strictly told not to touch anything, especially the locked trunk in the corner. Whenever she asked about it, her parents would quickly change the subject. But one chilly October evening, curiosity got the better of her. Her parents had gone to visit her grandmother for the weekend, leaving Emily alone for the first time. She decided it was the perfect opportunity to finally uncover the attic's secrets. With a flashlight in one hand and a skeleton key she'd found in her father's study in the other, she made her way up the creaky attic stairs. The air grew colder with each step, and the scent of dust and aged wood filled her nostrils. The attic was just as she remembered, dimly lit, cluttered with old furniture, boxes of forgotten belongings, and cobwebs. Her eyes immediately went to the trunk in the far corner. It looked out of place, almost as if the rest of the attic was designed to hide it. The trunk was made of dark wood, with ornate carvings that seemed to writhe under the flickering flashlight beam. As Emily approached, she felt a chill run down her spine. She hesitated, a strange sense of unease washing over her, but she shook it off, blaming her nerves on the eerie atmosphere. With trembling hands, she inserted the key into the lock. The trunk creaked open, revealing its contents: old photographs, a leather-bound diary, and a peculiar silver necklace with an intricate design. The photos were odd, black and white portraits of family members she didn't recognize, all wearing the same necklace. Curious, Emily picked up the diary and began to read. The entries were written in faded ink, starting with mundane details of daily life from the 1930s. But as she read on, the tone changed. The necklace is not what it seems. It whispers to me at night, telling me things I shouldn't know. I see shadows in the mirrors. Their eyes are mine. Emily's heart pounded as she read the increasingly frantic entries. The diary belonged to her great-grandmother, Evelyn, who wrote about a curse tied to the necklace. Evelyn had stolen it from a traveling fortune teller who warned her that the necklace carried a malevolent spirit. The spirit, Evelyn wrote, would haunt anyone who wore it, binding itself to the family for generations. Despite her fear, Emily couldn't resist picking up the necklace. The moment her fingers touched the cold metal, the room seemed to shift. The air grew heavier, the shadows darker. She heard a faint whisper, "Emily, put it on." Terrified, she dropped the necklace back into the trunk and slammed it shut. But the damage was done. That night, as she lay in bed, the whispers returned, louder this time. They spoke her name, coaxing her to open the trunk again. Her dreams were no better. She saw shadowy figures standing at the foot of her bed, their hollow eyes watching her. She woke up drenched in sweat, her heart racing. When her parents returned, Emily confronted them about the trunk and the necklace. Her mother's face went pale and her father's hands shook. Finally, they admitted the truth. The necklace was cursed, they said, and every generation had suffered because of it. Some family members went mad, others disappeared. Her father explained that the trunk was locked to keep the curse contained, though no one truly understood its power. Emily refused to live in fear. Determined to break the curse, she researched ways to destroy cursed objects. Every source warned her of the dangers, but she pressed on. One stormy night, armed with the diary and a strong will, Emily returned to the attic. The shadows seemed to shift and writhe as she approached the trunk. She opened it and took out the necklace. As she held it, the whispers turned into screams, and the attic door slammed shut behind her. The room grew unbearably cold, and dark figures emerged from the shadows. They circled her, their hollow eyes filled with malice. But Emily stood her ground. She lit the small fire she had prepared and threw the necklace into the flames. The screams intensified, echoing through the house. The figures lunged at her, but as the necklace melted, they dissolved into nothingness. The air grew still, and the attic was eerily quiet. For the first time in years, the Peterson family felt free. The curse was broken, or so they thought. A week later, as Emily walked past her bedroom mirror, she froze. In the reflection, a faint shadow lingered behind her, its hollow eyes watching. The Whitmore estate stood at the edge of town, a sprawling manor that had once been the jewel of the community. Now it was a shadow of its former self, its windows darkened, its gardens overgrown, and its walls whispering tales of despair. It had been in the family for generations, passed down like a curse, along with an unassuming antique, a silver hand mirror with a cracked surface. 22-year-old Lily Whitmore never understood why her family seemed so fearful of the mirror. Growing up, she'd been told countless times to leave it untouched. Her grandmother Eleanor would glare at it from across the room, muttering prayers under her breath. Her father, Robert, had even locked it away in a small cupboard in the study. But Lily didn't believe in curses or superstitions. To her, the mirror was just another piece of dusty family memorabilia. It wasn't until her grandmother's passing that her curiosity turned into obsession. As the family gathered for Eleanor's funeral, whispers of the mirror resurfaced. Distant relatives spoke in hushed tones, mentioning the incidents and how Eleanor had been the last to bear the burden of the Whitmore heirloom. Lily overheard snippets of conversation. She saw something in it, never spoke again. Her sister vanished the day she looked into it. Should have been destroyed long ago. That night, unable to sleep, Lily made her way to the study. The house was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that felt alive. She approached the cupboard where the mirror was kept, her heart pounding. The moment she opened the door, a gust of cold air rushed out, making her shiver. There it was, wrapped in a faded silk cloth. Her hands trembled as she unwrapped it. The mirror's surface was dull, its ornate silver frame tarnished with age. But despite the crack running through the glass, it seemed to draw her in. Lily held it up, staring at her reflection. For a moment, everything seemed normal. But then the air around her grew heavy. Her reflection blinked, only she hadn't. She dropped the mirror with a gasp, but it didn't shatter. Instead, it landed softly on the rug, as though something unseen had cushioned its fall. "Lily." The voice was faint, almost a whisper, but it came from nowhere and everywhere all at once. She spun around, her heart racing, but she was alone. Shaking her head, she convinced herself it was just her imagination. The following days were anything but ordinary. Lily began seeing fleeting shadows in the corners of her vision. Objects in the house seemed to move on their own. The mirror, though she'd left it in the study, kept reappearing in her bedroom. One night she awoke to find it propped on her dresser, its cracked surface reflecting something that wasn't there. A dark, looming figure standing at the foot of her bed. Panicking, she threw a blanket over it and ran to her father. Robert's face paled when she told him what had happened. He sighed deeply, his hands trembling as he poured himself a drink. "It's time you knew the truth," he said, his voice heavy with dread. He explained that the mirror had belonged to the first Whitmore to settle in the manor, a woman named Margaret. Margaret had been a recluse, obsessed with her own reflection. According to legend, she'd made a pact with something dark, offering her soul in exchange for eternal beauty. The mirror became the vessel of that pact, trapping her essence and cursing the family line. "She's in there, Lily," Robert said, his voice barely above a whisper. "She watches, waits, and sometimes she escapes." Determined to break the curse, Lily sought help from local historians and occult experts. Most dismissed her story, but one old woman, a retired librarian named Agnes, believed her. "The mirror must be shattered in a place where no reflection can form," Agnes advised. "Take it to the forest at midnight, but be warned, she won't let go easily." That night, Lily and Robert carried the mirror into the woods. The journey was fraught with unease. Every rustle of leaves felt like footsteps, every gust of wind like a whisper. When they reached a clearing, Lily placed the mirror on a rock. She raised a hammer, her hands shaking. "Do it quickly," Robert urged. As she swung, the reflection in the mirror shifted. It wasn't her face anymore. It was Margaret's. Her eyes were dark pits, her mouth twisted into a scream. The air grew icy, and a deafening roar filled the clearing. Shadows erupted from the mirror, swirling around them. Lily swung again, this time with all her strength. The mirror shattered, its pieces scattering like shards of ice. The shadows screamed and dissipated, leaving the forest eerily silent. Back at the house, the oppressive atmosphere had lifted. The mirror's curse was broken, or so they thought. Weeks later, as Lily walked past an antique store in town, something in the window caught her eye. It was a silver hand mirror, its surface cracked in a familiar way. Her reflection blinked. The Thompson family had always been close-knit. There were 4 of them: Alan, a hard-working father; Elizabeth, a caring mother; their teenage son, David; and their youngest daughter, Sophie. They lived in a cozy home on the outskirts of town, surrounded by quiet woods and fields. It was the kind of place where neighbors still said hello on their morning walks, and evenings were spent on the porch, chatting about the day. But the atmosphere of the house changed when Alan brought home an old family heirloom, an antique dining chair that had been passed down through generations. It was a beautiful piece, made of dark mahogany with intricate carvings and plush velvet cushioning. Alan had found it at a local estate sale and thought it would be a perfect addition to their dining room. At first, the family admired the chair's craftsmanship, even discussing how it seemed out of place in their otherwise modern home. But things took a strange turn once it was placed at the end of the dinner table. The first incident was subtle, easily overlooked. One evening, the Thompsons sat down for dinner, and the chair, seated at the far end of the table, suddenly creaked as if someone had sat down in it. No one had moved. David, always the skeptic, dismissed it as the house settling. But Elizabeth, who had always been sensitive to odd occurrences, couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Days passed, and the family continued to use the chair at mealtime. Each time, the creaking continued, and occasionally, a chill would fill the room. The other chairs, solid and familiar, seemed unaffected, but the one at the end of the table seemed to beckon them. Even Sophie, who was usually full of energy, began to complain about feeling uneasy around the chair. One evening, as the family gathered for dinner, they noticed something more unsettling. Alan had just finished saying grace when they all heard a soft, almost imperceptible scraping noise. The sound came from the chair. Alan stood up and walked over to investigate, thinking that perhaps a leg of the chair had become loose. But when he reached the chair, it was perfectly still. No one had touched it. David and Sophie stared at him, both visibly shaken. Elizabeth spoke up, her voice trembling. "I think it's time we get rid of that chair." Alan hesitated. He didn't believe in ghosts or spirits, but the strange occurrences were starting to worry him. He shrugged it off, dismissing the whole situation as coincidence. But that night, something far more sinister happened. After dinner, as the family relaxed in the living room, Sophie wandered into the dining room. She came back moments later, wide-eyed and pale, clutching her chest. "Mom! Dad! There's someone sitting in the chair." Elizabeth and Alan exchanged confused glances. "Sophie, there's no one there," Alan said, rising to his feet. But when they entered the dining room, they too saw it. A figure, an outline of a person, sitting in the chair at the end of the table. It was as if the chair had absorbed the presence of someone long gone. The figure was vague, not entirely solid, but its form was unmistakable. Tall, with a shadowed face, its hands resting on the arms of the chair. Alan reached for the chair, but as his fingers brushed the backrest, the figure disappeared with a soft gasp, like a breath held too long. The air in the room grew thick, cold. The table lights flickered, and the family stood in silence. From that moment on, the figure was no longer a rare occurrence. Every night, during dinner, the chair would creak, and the family would feel the coldness fill the room. No one could explain it. Alan tried to move the chair, but it always returned to its spot at the end of the table, as though it belonged there. One night in desperation, Elizabeth searched through the old family heirloom's history. She discovered something chilling. The chair once belonged to a wealthy family from the 1800s, the Carvers. The head of the household, Richard Carver, had been known for his violent temper. He had mysteriously disappeared from his home one night, and no trace of him was ever found. There were rumors, however, that he had been murdered in the chair, a place he often sat when entertaining guests. The story went on to say that Richard's ghost, bound by his unfinished business, would appear during dinner time, sitting in his favorite chair, as though waiting for the meal to begin. No one had ever seen him, of course, until now. The family knew they had to do something. Alan, reluctant but fearing for his family's safety, decided to burn the chair, believing it would release whatever was bound to it. As he started the fire, the room grew cold once again. Sophie screamed as she saw the shadowy figure appear once more, sitting calmly in the chair despite the flames that surrounded it. In that moment, the figure stood up, its dark silhouette slowly turning toward them. Its face was still hidden, but they could hear the voice, soft but unmistakably clear, whispering, "Dinner is served." The chair ignited in flames, but no matter how much they tried to destroy it, it refused to burn. Eventually, the flames fizzled out, leaving only a pile of ashes. The figure vanished, leaving an empty room filled with silence. The next day, the family left their home, never to return. They moved far away, hoping to escape the terrifying entity that haunted their dinners. But in the quietest of moments, when they least expected it, the soft creak of a chair could still be heard, and the chilling whisper of a long-dead dinner guest would echo in their minds, reminding them that some guests never truly leave.